We are 3 weeks into the NFL season, so it's time to take a look at some dynasty observations and things that we are starting to learn about these players from the 2021 NFL season and start projecting forward based on these observations to see if we can gain some fantasy value and some dynasty insight into what could potentially be happening for the remainder of the year into the 2022 dynasty offseason. So let's get right into the video. So let's get started. Let's get set here into first down and take a look at Panthers quarterback Sam Darnold, who has looked absolutely fantastic to start the NFL season and is actually the QB 11 through the first 3 weeks. He has thrown for over 300 yards in 2 of the first 3 games so far and actually threw for 279 in the other game as well, and has scored 2 total touchdowns in all 3 games and only has 1 interception so far. Plus, on top of that, the Panthers are also 3-0 right now at the top of the NFC South division, and this offense is also delivering for fantasy football with a lot of different weapons on that team as well. Those of you in Dynasty who have bought low on Sam Darnold are definitely being rewarded right now with a legitimate QB2 and a Dynasty asset that is basically guaranteed to rise in value, especially among the other quarterbacks that Sam Darnold was behind to start the NFL season. And that was one thing that I really loved, and I pointed that out about Daniel Jones, and why I loved him so much was that it was so easy for him to climb in value if he did well. Sam Darnold also fits that bill as well. Entering the 2021 season, Darnold was the QB 25 in Dynasty ADP and was actually behind a whole bunch of other quarterbacks that he is almost certain to rise above to start the 2022 NFL offseason, if not already above those guys right now. Guys like Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston, Zach Wilson, and Mac Jones, the other 2 rookie quarterbacks, and potentially even guys like Ryan Tannehill and Baker Mayfield if they're producing at a pretty similar level. Sam Darnold has the age on them and could surpass them in dynasty value if he continues to do well, and those other 2 just kind of fall into some sort of mediocrity at the quarterback position. And there are a lot of positives for Sam Darnold as well. I mean, he's entering his 4th NFL season at only 24 years old. He had the draft capital as a former first-round pick in the NFL. The Panthers have committed to him through at least next season, picking up his 5th-year option on his rookie deal. And he also has, like I mentioned before already, a plethora of weapons to throw to support him in fantasy football as much as he supports them for fantasy. Guys like DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Terrace Marshall, who's starting to take over Robbie Anderson's role. And then, of course, when healthy, obviously, Christian McCaffrey and the other running backs like Chuba Hubbard behind Christian McCaffrey when he's out. And we also know that they have a really good head coach in Matt Rule, an awesome offensive coordinator in Joe Brady, who seem to know what they're doing and are building this Panthers team the right way, so it seems, at least to start the season. So the future is very bright for Sam Darnold in both Dynasty and NFL. So congratulations to those of you who had Sam Darnold and believe and stuck through it. And then also those of you who bought low this Dynasty offseason because you seem to have a really good quarterback asset at just 24 years old. So let's move on down now into second down and start looking at the rookie wide receiver position, specifically with Jamar Chase. I mean, he's been every bit of the wide receiver that we thought he could be, the wide receiver 1 in this 2021 rookie class, and has been absolutely electric to start the season as well. The current wide receiver 11, primarily on the back of 4 receiving touchdowns. Since 2000, Jamar Chase is one of 31 other rookie wide receivers to accumulate 40 or more fantasy points through the first 3 weeks of their rookie seasons. That list also includes a bunch of other names that you guys will all know. Guys like Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb from last year, Terry McLaurin, Calvin Ridley, Michael Thomas, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green. Those are just guys in the last decade, not to mention a whole bunch of other fantastic wide receivers from the 2000s decade as well. However, there is one other rookie wide receiver that I do want to mention and bring up that has also passed the 40-point mark through 3 weeks, and that is Miami Dolphins first rounder Jalen Waddle, who is currently averaging 9 targets and 7 receptions per game, mostly on the back of 13 targets and 12 receptions last week, but that is at least the usage and the role that he has found himself in, and he has improved in targets and receptions each of the 3 weeks that he has played so far. And though he's only scored once, he's become heavily involved in this offense with and without Tua Tagovailoa at the quarterback position. And what's really interesting about Jalen Waddle, at least so far, is his utilization and role in this offense. It looks like the Dolphins are using him more as their Deontay Johnson type wide receiver rather than a real deep threat weapon like a Henry Ruggs and that type of role in their offense, which is absolutely fantastic for Jalen Waddle and his role in this offense and his future outlook in both the NFL and for Dynasty Fantasy Football, because that role is going to give him a lot more opportunities to actually get the ball in space, and then do what he does best with yards after the catch and potentially scoring some big home run plays for you on a weekly basis. Waddle has certainly given those of you who drafted him in the first round of your rookie drafts this year in Dynasty a promising future, promising outlook for Dynasty, and has actually separated himself from the other rookie wide receivers behind Jamar Chase so far, or at least is up there and could be similarly valued to other guys that we liked more pre-draft, like Devonta Smith and then, of course, Jamar Chase. And he separated himself from the other guys that were drafted behind him in both the NFL and in rookie drafts as well. So wheels up for Jalen Waddle. Hopefully he continues to have this type of role and can continue to grow and expand upon that role in this Miami Dolphins offense, even as Tua Tagovailoa returns from his injury currently. So moving on into third down, there may be a legitimate conversation about TJ Hockenson entering the top 3 Dynasty tight ends next offseason. And I know saying that after his week 3 performance is probably not the best timing, but the fact remains that TJ Hockenson has been great to start the year and has been the breakout tight end that a lot of us believe that he could be to start the 2021 NFL season. And entering the season, Hawk was the tight end 5 in Dynasty ADP behind Kyle Pitts, Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, and George Kittle. But I believe that there's a conversation that he can actually elevate himself to elite tight end status and potentially be in the top 3 Dynasty tight ends next offseason. So we can look at it and take a go one by one through these tight ends that I just named that were already above him and will probably be up there in that same conversation next year. Obviously, number 1 was Kyle Pitts. TJ Hockenson is never going to pass Kyle Pitts in Dynasty value, at least not next year, unless he completely Eric Ebron's out of the league and out of Dynasty favor. So he's never going to pass Kyle Pitts. He probably won't pass Travis Kelce next year either, even though there's a 7-year age difference. It's Travis Kelce. I mean, he's absolutely fantastic, and he's not slowing down anytime soon. So the real debates are between Darren Waller and George Kittle. And so far, Hockenson has at least paced Darren Waller in receptions, yards, touchdowns, and fantasy points, only being 1 fantasy point behind Darren Waller through the first 3 weeks of the NFL season, including his meek, miserable 2 reception game that he just had this past week. And while Waller still has the volume and the targets on TJ Hockenson, like I said, if Hockenson didn't have his 2 target game this past week, that number would look a lot close between the two of them as well through the first 3 games of the season. So for Dynasty, I mean, Hockenson has 5 years of age on Darren Waller. So if they're going to be producing similarly and continue to produce pretty similarly for the rest of the 2021 season, and when 2 players in Dynasty are producing pretty similarly, that edge is generally given to the younger player, in this case, TJ Hockenson over Darren Waller. And the same can be said for George Kittle, who's actually 4 fantasy points per game behind TJ Hockenson right now, mainly due to a lack of touchdowns. Hockenson has 2. George Kittle has yet to score, so that's really the biggest difference. But Kittle is kind of scary to me. I mean, ideally, the 49ers would love to be a run-first team that plays good defense, and we've seen games where the Niners have won strictly just on running the ball, but also they also have good weapons outside of George Kittle that don't make Kittle as necessary as he once was in this 49ers offense. I mean, Deebo Samuel is currently 2nd in the league among wide receivers in receiving yards and 8th among wide receivers in targets. Brandon Ayuk is also there, the first rounder last year, who started out slow this year due to injury, but has started to come back to life and even scored a touchdown last week. So, it's kind of the same argument as Darren Waller for George Kittle, in that Hockenson has 3 years of age on George Kittle. So if they're producing similarly for the remainder of the 2021 season, that edge is going to go to the younger player. And again, in this case, that could be TJ Hockenson beating out George Kittle because of age and similar production. Of course, there's still the possibility that Hawk is still the tight end 5 behind all 4 of those tight ends through the next offseason in 2022. But I think that the gap and the difference in value that there was to start the season this year, a 2-round ADP gap between tight end 4 George Kittle and tight end 5 TJ Hockenson to start the year this year, that gap is not going to be as big or even there at all to start the year next year whenever we start talking about Dynasty tight ends for 2022. And so TJ Hockenson could realistically, like I said, elevate himself in the dynasty world to becoming an elite tight end and being in that same kind of tier as Darren Waller, as George Kittle, as potentially even Travis Kelce due to the major age difference. And if he continues getting 7+ targets per game in this Detroit Lions offense and being that necessary receiver that we've seen from him in the first 2 weeks of the season, he will elevate himself to that status and enter, in my opinion, the top 3 dynasty tight end conversation pretty easily next year. And then finally, we enter 4th down, and I want to give you one number here that has become very important for the 2021 NFL fantasy football season. That number is 4. That is the number of receptions that Derrick Henry is currently averaging per game to start the year through the first 3 weeks. And that number is absolutely bonkers considering Derrick Henry's past, and a number that dynasty managers and believers in Derrick Henry have only really dreamed about for Derrick Henry's receiving usage. I mean, while he's been fantastic on the ground, as we all know, been absolutely dominant on the ground running the ball, last year he still only finished as the RB3 in fantasy points, even after rushing for 2,000 rushing yards and scoring 17 rushing touchdowns. He still only finished as the RB3, and I say only RB3 because he still averaged 4 to 5 fantasy points per game less than Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara, who were the RB1 and the RB2 last year. 4 to 5 fantasy points per game less. That is a major difference in running back tiers from last year, and that has always been Derrick Henry's biggest disadvantage, especially in PPR leagues, when it comes to his fantasy production, is having no receiving game role. I mean, he doesn't even need an Alvin Kamara or Christian McCaffrey type role. We never really wanted that for Derrick Henry, and that's not really his skill set. But a Josh Jacobs role, a Nick Chubb role, could we get him some receptions and some targets? I mean, last year, Josh Jacobs had 33 receptions on 45 targets. Jacobs actually had more receptions last year than Derrick Henry had targets in 2020. That's not a role. I mean, it's absolutely insane the usage that Derrick Henry could have had and could have been getting in the receiving game over the past few years that could have made him even more dominant than what he already is, and it's taken him this long to get this type of receiving workload. But it's fantastic that it's here. We love that it's here, and we love and hope that it continues to happen for Derrick Henry, because prior to 2021, his career high in receptions was 19, and he's already at 12 through the first 3 weeks of the season. And that receiving work is the biggest reason why Derrick Henry is not only the RB1 overall right now, but is averaging 25 points per game and 4 more points per game than the RB2 Aaron Jones right now. And that's a major difference and a major league winning type performance out of Derrick Henry if that receiving game workload continues like we've already seen through the first 3 weeks of the season. So please, Tennessee, please keep it up, and please keep giving Derrick Henry 3 to 4 targets and receptions per game, because fantasy managers and fantasy people all over are going to love you for giving Derrick Henry that type of receiving game workload. Obviously, there are a lot more things that you could take from the 2021 NFL season through the first 3 weeks already. And if you want to see a very specific recap on just week 3 for Dynasty observations, then you can go and click this link right up here and watch that video. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We will catch y'all later.